Hi, everyone, and thank you for watching this brief feedback video for mini project number 1. I want to go ahead and talk a little bit about the reason why you have this assignment. Believe it or not, this is a very common mistake that businesses make. They classify their employees incorrectly. A lot of companies want to just pay everyone a salary because it's easy to manage. We don't have to, it's less administrative time. We don't have to track hours. Let's just pay everyone a salary and call it good. Now, I understand where they're coming from. However, the law unfortunately doesn't agree with that sentiment. So what you need to do is you need to remember that all positions should be paid hourly and should be paid overtime unless they qualify for the exemption. And so this is what I used to tell my clients all the time. You will never get in trouble if you pay everyone an hourly wage and then pay them overtime. That's not a problem. Where the problem falls is where you're paying people a salary and they should be being paid an hourly wage. So there are a couple of different ways a position can qualify for an exemption. So there are executive exemptions, administrative, professional, computer, outside sales, or highly compensated. So if a position falls under one of those exemptions, then you can pay them a salary. Otherwise, if it doesn't, you must pay them an hourly wage and they also must get overtime. So let's go ahead and take a look at the first one. So business development manager, this is exempt. They qualify for an exemption under the outside sales exemption. So if you were to look at the FLSA fact sheet and you were to go to the outside sales exemption area, it says to qualify for the outside sales employee exemption, all of the following must be met. First, the employee's primary duty must be making sales, contracts, etc. And the employees must be customarily and regularly away from the place of business. So when you look at this job description over here, or this brief job description, I should say, it says this employee will be going to potential customers and requesting their business. And therefore, this position falls under exempt, under the outside sales exemption. Let's go ahead and look at administrative assistant. This is a non-exempt position. This position does not fall under any of the exemptions listed on the fact sheet. Now, some students do get confused because they see the word administrative, and so they assume that they can go ahead and put them under the administrative exemption. But if you were to look at the administrative exemption, it talks about the primary duty being responsible for the performance of the office or the management of general business operations. And when you look at this position's job description, it says that they'll meet visitors, they'll answer phones, and they'll order supplies. So they're really not responsible for running that business, are they? So therefore, they have to be paid an hourly wage and they get overtime. The manufacturing manager falls under exemption under the executive. Now, the salesperson, this can be a little bit tricky. I know a lot of inside salespeople who qualify for exemptions. However, this particular job description, they would not. And so a salesperson is non-exempt only for this particular company and what they're doing. And that's why that job description is so important. We talked about job analysis and job description and getting that right. And that's why that's so important. That job analysis creates that job description and the job specification. Based on that, and based on that description, you will then determine whether you pay them overtime or not. So that's why it's important to get that right. So this particular salesperson, well, all they're doing is making phone calls. They don't fall under any sort of exemption. They don't fall under the outside sales exemption. They don't fall under the professional or the administrative or any of the other exemptions. So for this company, this sales position would be non-exempt. But again, I know many companies that their inside salespeople are exempt from overtime because they have other duties that might fall under the professional exemption or the administrative, if that makes sense. Just not this particular company. We have an assembly tech that's non-exempt because it's a blue collar worker. That information can be found on the fact sheet. And then last, we have the engineer. And this is exempt as well because it falls under either professional Or it could fall under computer. There's not a lot of information here. I've had an argument before from students that said, well, you're not really talking about what type of engineer. Is it a software engineer, systems engineer, or is it a design engineer? You kind of mentioned that it does product designs, but it could be computer related too. So I'll go ahead and take either one of those, professional or computer employee exemptions. So that was the first thing that you need to do. The second thing you needed to do was to write a letter to the president. And why do I have you doing this? Well, let me explain why. As an HR professional, you are the expert in employment law. A lot of presidents and CEOs might not be familiar with all the different laws out there. And if they're not familiar with FLSA, well, they might want to go ahead and make everyone an salaried employee. And it's up to you as the HR professional to communicate back to that president and CEO why they're making a mistake. And so you have to make a really great argument. So number one, you need to know your law. And so that's basically why I'm having you, one, write a brief summary of the overtime law. You need to know the law and you need to be able to communicate that to senior leadership, number one. Number two, you need to be able to identify which ones should and should not be paid overtime. Right? And number three, for those who are exempt, you need to make the argument as to why, because they're going to question why. And then you can obviously be able to communicate why based on this fact sheet. Communication is so important for an HR professional because we are constantly questioned. Why are we doing certain things? And one of the things that I always try to tell my clients when I was in a consulting role is assume that the company knows nothing about laws, labor laws, and it's up to you to make sure that they follow them to keep them out of trouble. And the best way to do that is to know your law and be able to communicate effectively. And so that's really why I have that second part. It's not enough to just be able to identify which positions are exempt and non-exempt. That's great. You also have to be able to communicate why. And so that's what I'm looking for in that second part. So if you're able to provide a brief summary of the overtime, which ones are paid overtime and which ones are not, and then those who are not, this area is worth 50 points. Now, unfortunately, if you get one of these wrong in the first part, you're going to get some of those wrong in the second part as well. But I promise you, I will not be that harsh. I'm not going to double dip you too much, but it is important for you to understand why these positions are paid overtime and why they are not. If you have any questions, please reach out, and thank you so much.